Day, and she's been fussed. So that's been avoided. I'm aware of certain events in life, and one of the things that happens with Mother's Day is that there's often an enormous sentimentalism and fuss made about Mother's Day, almost to an extreme in some circumstances. And what that ends up doing is it tends to isolate or marginalize some women who, for reasons that they had or no choice about, or they did have a choice, never became mothers, or they had estrangements with their mothers for whatever reason. And so the Mother's Day becomes this really complicated, complex kind of a thing. And so what I've noticed in recent years is almost a badge of honor if I can sort of highlight the complexity of Mother's Day in order to stumble over ourselves being empathetic with the problem with Mother's Day. And so this pendulum kind of swings all the way to the other extreme. And what ends up happening, therefore, is that those who are mothers and who have had good mothering experiences and have good relationships with their children are suddenly made to feel somewhat guilty for actually being blessed by having good mothers and being good mothers and having good children and so on. And so it can become this really complex kind of thing. And I'm aware as a pastor that there are three things that you never want to get wrong: weddings, funerals, and Mother's Day. And I fear that this morning I run the risk of falling into the trap of ruining Mother's Day, because what I'm going to do here this morning is not perhaps what you would expect. And we're going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but I ask that you bear with me as we find the pastures of green pasture beyond. We will make it to the promised land, but it may not seem like that as we go. And so I want to talk about Mother's Day in a particular kind of way by honoring women. And because every mother is a woman. Not every woman becomes a mother, but every mother is a woman. And I want to honor women. And by doing that, I kind of walk down the middle path between those who had complex relationships with their mothers and those who had glorious relationships with their mothers, and find the common path where we can honor women in general. So that's how I'm going to approach it this morning. And I want to say at the outset that, and particularly for those who might be listening online, I just want to give a kind of a content and trigger warning here, because I'm going to talk about some difficult issues, particularly around domestic violence. And I want to give you the warning that I'm going to do that so that you can sort of get up and go and take some self-care if necessary this morning. So I want to start with this. Now, I don't know how much attention any of you pay to social media. I'm fairly immersed in social media and pay a fair bit of attention to it. And this is a little meme that has been running around in recent weeks. And what has happened is a guy has gone into the street with a microphone, and he's walked up to women and he's asked them this question: if you were alone in the woods, would you rather meet a bear or a man you didn't know? And surprisingly, or maybe not so, depending on your experience in life, significant numbers of women chose the bear. Now, that ought to tell us as men something serious. It's very telling. And I want to read you just some of the reasons why the women are saying they'd rather meet the bear. The bear wouldn't pretend to be my friend. If it's a bear and I yell, someone might help me. The bear would only kill me and not tell me to enjoy it. If it was a bear, no one would ask me what I was wearing or if I drank too much. A bear hunts to survive. A man hunts for fun. A bear wouldn't record it and use it for blackmail. A bear wouldn't brag to his friends. We aren't choosing the bear, they say, because we think we would survive. We choose the bear because we know that there are worse things than just being killed. Now, let those kind of words kind of sink here, and particularly for those of us who are men, because this is the lived experience for a significant proportion of 50% of the human population. Now, understand that there's some cynicism here, and I don't know that a woman really would choose a bear necessarily, But the point is being made here is that the cynicism is rooted in some reality. And given the details of what the harm that's being talked about in circumstances has gone too far. There we go. What's going on in the world today, and particularly what's making the press, it's time for the world to pause and think, and for the church to pause and think. This is from 2013. You can't see the details. I pulled it off from the World Health Organization. That was the last time they recorded this. And at the time in Australia or Oceania, the recording was 1 in 4 women have reported violence or sexual or abuse against them. 1 in 4 women. So based on the numbers here, 1 in 4 of you will have faced some form of violence by a partner. The more recent detail in Australia is this: 2 in 5 women have experienced violence since the age of 15. Men are commonly the perpetrators of physical violence, sexual harassment, and sexual violence. Women are more likely to experience violence from someone they know than by a stranger. On average, 1 woman is killed every 9 days by a current or former partner. 1 woman is killed every 9 days by a former or current partner. In the year 2021-2022, 4,620 women aged 15 years and over, an average of 13 women a day, were hospitalized due to family and domestic violence, and large numbers of those would have been Aboriginal women. 1 in 3 women has experienced physical violence since the age of 15. 1 in 5 women has experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. 1 in 2 women has experienced sexual harassment in their lifetime. In most incidents of workplace sexual harassment, the harasser was male. Women are at increased risk of experiencing violence from an intimate partner during pregnancy. And women who have experienced violence are more likely to experience multiple incidents of violence. These are the current details in Australia, and it's sobering. It's sobering. This is the lived reality for women, significant numbers of women. And the reality is that most sexual assaults, no matter the degree on the scale from minor harassment all the way to violent rape, most of the time it's not reported. And the answer, why is it not reported? But for the simple reason, because women see what happened to women who do. This is an exhibition, a photo from an exhibition that was in the University of Kansas in 2017 entitled, "What Was She Wearing?" And women came and they just displayed the clothing they were wearing when they were abused or sexually assaulted. And most of the time, 99% of the time, it was just regular everyday clothing. And the reason that they're showing this is because this question, what was she wearing, is a kind of victim blaming question. As soon as a woman comes forward and said, I was sexually assaulted, the question is, well, what was she wearing? As if somehow that is pertinent to the situation. What was she doing? Why was she there? Why was she asking for it? How can you expect him to stop when she was so tempting? The victim is blamed so often and her personal life so dragged through the mud that it's better to shut up and keep going than to seek justice. A common refrain, and I've heard it in my ears, I won't be used to fix that man or that system. Let someone else do it. I just want to get on with my life. And yet the things that would most help her to get on with her life, which is justice, seems to be the one thing the system is designed to prevent. The reality is that once a woman comes forward with a complaint, she has had to overcome a range of personal and social barriers, which indicates why only 3 to 7% of all allegations of sexual abuse and harm by women are found to be false. By the time she's come forward, there's almost certainly that it's true. It's very easy to prove false allegations. The story will almost unravel almost immediately. But when she comes forward, we ought to believe her. This is the lived experience of women in Australia. And we men have no idea. We have no experience what it means to be a woman jogging alone in the middle of the day and see a man coming towards her and for her to think, I wish that was a bear. Now, of course, this is not the experience of all women. And there is some cynicism involved here, and I understand that. But it is necessary if things are going to change for us to recognize that this is true for many, many women. I was having this conversation online, and this woman said to me, we were talking about what men fear and what women fear, and she says, well, we all fear the same things. But then she said this, the fear of seeing a man whilst being completely isolated is a different kind of fear. Men don't experience this kind of fear when seeing a woman. It's the fear of bodily harm, violation, and death. I don't fear when I'm standing in an elevator if a woman gets alone with me. It does tell me why she refuses to. But at least in church, things will be better. All Jesus and mercy and love and grace and forgiveness, right? And yet I know, and I know that some of you know, that the statistics in the church are not a whole lot better. And in fact, in the nature of church and its supposed mission, it might even be worse. Churches are supposed to be safe places, right? A woman comes to the leaders of the church and tells them that her husband is abusing her, or that she's being sexually harassed or assaulted by someone in the leadership group, or a ministry leader, or the pastor. If she's lucky enough to be believed, which is not as common as you might think, it is unlikely she will be counseled in any way that prioritizes her voice and safety and seeks justice. I want to quote you some words from John Street. Now, John Street is an elder at John MacArthur's church, and he's also the professor of counseling at the Master's University and the Master's Seminary. And what they're doing here is training counselors and pastors. And he said this, we don't agree that the primary goal of a counselor working with an abuse situation is to make personal escape and protection the essential object of the counsel. Let me repeat that. We don't agree that the primary goal of a counselor working with an abuse situation is to make personal escape and protection the essential object of their counsel. What is he saying? It's okay that we want women to be safe, but it shouldn't be essential. And now he's training pastors and counselors with this information. The message that he is giving to pastors and counselors in training is safety is not a priority. And I listened to a whole section of this, and this is part of what he was saying, that safety is not a priority. Reconciliation is the priority. And this requires the victim to be willing to work to help change their abusers, and is, in fact, a key player in helping to change their abusers. This is what they're being taught. It places the onus on repairing the relationship on the abused in church. Is it any wonder we have such a problem in our churches? If the abuser doesn't change, it becomes, at least in part, the abused person's fault for not actively and adequately engaging in the process. This is such a dangerous theology and advice, and it shows an appalling lack of understanding of power dynamics and trauma and the dynamics of abuse and abusers. You mix male physical power and the power most men have over others in churches with this theology, and you end up with a toxic mix of abuse-enabling behaviors. Is it any wonder so many women don't feel safe in church? The church needs to be better. And then there is this view of the church, of women within the church. This is a book by a man named Stephen Wolfe. It's current. He just published it last year, called Christian Nationalism. The Christian Nationalism, the gist of the message of the book is that, amongst other things, ethnicities should not mix. So he has a problem with mixed ethnic marriages, for instance. He thinks that heretics should be killed and can be killed, that violent revolution is already justified, and that what the USA needs, and specifically, is a charismatic Caesar-like leader to raise our consciousness and galvanize the will of the people, which, if that sounds like Nazi Germany, it should, because that's pretty much what Nazi Germany sounds like. But this is done within a Christian context. So these are Christians, and becoming less fringe, by the way, in the United States, and are influencing some parts of the church in Australia. And then he says this, he uses this word gynocracy, a rule by women. And he says this may not be apparent on the surface, since men still run many things, but the governing virtues of America, and in sense any liberalized Western democracy, are feminine vices associated with certain feminine virtues, such as empathy, fairness, and equality. And what he means by feminine vices are being too gracious, being too kind, being too merciful, not knowing when to say enough is enough. That is, not being autocratic enough, not being authoritarian enough. And the reason that is because he calls these feminine vices. There is a belief in this theological system that says that women, all women, are meant to rely on men and be subjected to them. I want to read you another quote from his book. The modern state ensures women's independence. And for him, this is a problem. Women should not be independent. It's the ultimate third party. It renders personal dependence on men entirely optional. And for him, this is a problem. The state is their father and brother and husband. The modern state makes possible a woman's independence and equality in society. And the reason he said the way they do it is to make men look terrible. Now, let's be honest here. Sometimes men look terrible. And basically what he's saying is that he has decided that the things that make men men, strength, adventurism, leadership, and aggressive competition, are a problem and need to be eliminated and instead replaced by feminine virtues. This is what he's pushing back against. And so he's saying that the pendulum used to be male domination, and that was good. And now it's all swung all the way over to feminist thinking, and that's really, really bad. And we need to swing the pendulum all the way back to male domination. As long as women are being controlled and under the umbrella of sanctified male leadership, then it's okay for them to exercise their virtues of empathy, fairness, and quality. But outside of male authority, it's malignant. What he's really doing is simply turning women into children. It's really, really interesting. This just showed up today. I'm going to just emphasize, this is in the church, and that's why I'm emphasizing this. This is in some parts of the church. And this showed up today, and I want to read it to you because it's appalling. This is a guy named, he's a pastor, named Joel Webbin, and he says that he won't allow his wife to read a book without his permission. He will decide whether she should read these books or not, because whether or not the theology meets his requirement, he's treating his wife like a child. And this is a form of Christianity that wants to subjugate women and push them back to the 16th century, where they're simply baby factories raising children in the church. And then there's this, and I have a very difficult relationship with Mr. Calvin. I think some of his stuff is really good, and I think some of his stuff is really bad. And this is some of his stuff that's really bad. This is his commentary on 1 Corinthians 11. On this account, all women are born that they may acknowledge themselves inferior in consequence of the superiority of the male sex. Is there any wonder that there tends to be this kind of subjugating, misogynistic, patriarchal, controlling kind of anti-woman feeling in some churches? And I'm aware it's not in all. But empathy and fairness and equality are not just feminine virtues. They're human virtues. They're the virtues of Christ, a man. Jesus was a powerful man because of his meekness, his gentleness, and his self-control. These are the things that made him powerful. These virtues may be more prevalent in women, but they should not be missing in men any more than strength, adventurism, and leadership should be missing in women, although they may be more prevalent in men. We should encourage all the virtues in either gender, with each gender having something important to say to one another. I think that the world, and sadly too often the church, has lost its understanding of what the definition means to be a man or to be a woman. And this messed up anthropology is causing all kinds of grief in the world. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 27 and 28, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and told them to fill the earth, to subdue it, and have dominion. And I've put down there, God has called men and women to be co-regents. Men and women are created together as the image of God. A man who stands alone without a woman is not created in the image of God. The fullness of the image of God is not seen in him, is what I mean by that. A woman who stands alone without a man, the fullness of the image of God is not seen in her. It is when a man and a woman together The fullness of God's image is seen in men and women together. There are certain characteristics that go beyond just mere physiology that define what is a man. And there are certain characteristics beyond mere physiology which decide what is a woman. And the two of those things are designed to cooperate with one another and to support one another and to encourage one another and to complement one another. And it's the complementing and it's the fullness of man and woman together that the image of God is seen. And to say anything less is to denigrate women. This is the way it was in the beginning. But the way it is now is not the way it was meant to be from the beginning. This is Genesis 3:16, and this is part of God's call, sin, the impact of sin on the anthropology of men and women. And I put 3 different translations down there just so you can see the words that are there. You will want to control your husband. This is the New English translation, but he will dominate you. The ESV is your husband, or your desire will be contrary to your husband, while he will rule over you. And here is in the NIV, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And what I'm highlighting there in Genesis 4:7, that sin desired Cain. And the word desire there is not a good thing, it's a bad thing. It means I'm going to seek to usurp you, overthrow you, grapple with you, and take what is yours. I'm going to seek to overthrow you. And so what is being highlighted in Genesis 3:16 is the war between the sexes. That since the fall, women are going to be grappling with men to usurp and control, and men are going to grapple with women to usurp and control, and it was never meant to be this way. And yet this is the way that it is. And unfortunately for women, men are physically stronger, which means if I want to lord my authority over you, all I have to do is hit you. And so this is what happens, and this defines so much of the history of the world, including today. But I want to move out now of the valley of the shadow of death, because I want us to have some hope here. Proverbs 31:10, a wife of noble character who could find. We used to make a joke like that. A good wife, who can find one? I'm looking, I can't find a good wife. Well, there's one right over there. I see, I said it publicly. She's over there. You missed out. All the rest of you guys, you missed out, right? A wife of noble character, who can find? And what I'm trying to highlight there is that the Hebrew word there, Hebrew, a woman of value, that's what it means. And it's the same words that you will find in Ruth in chapter 3, when Naomi says to Ruth, so now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you say, for all my people in the city know you are a woman of excellence. And that word is the same word that's used in Judges 6:12 when it's talking about Gideon. Gideon is a man of valor. It's a word of demonstrates character. It's used of physical valor in battle. The land-owning aristocrat who could champion the needs of his people in the times of peace and war. Women who are created in the image of God and co-regents with men are called to be strong and powerful, even if they're not called to be mothers. Being a mother is not the sole defining, self-identifying vision of womanhood any more than being a father is the sole defining characteristic of a man. You don't have to be a wife. You don't have to be a mother. But if you were born with 2 X chromosomes, you have to be a woman. And if you're a woman, you're called to be strong and have valor. That's what God has called you to. You can be virtuous well and long before, or if you ever or never become a mother. Motherhood does not determine valor. The fact that you are human determines that. I want to finish by encouraging women by looking at 1 Samuel in chapters 1 and 2. This is the story of Hannah, and you guys will know this really well. Hannah is a woman who wants children, and she can't bear them. And this is a problem for her, as the story tells us. And you know that this story is true. And you know how one of the ways you know the story is true in the Bible is how the humanity of the story just rings and resonates with human experience. She's concerned because the Lord had closed her womb. And her husband says to her, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" What a stupid man thing to say, right? That's such a stupid man thing to say. He fails to get it. What do you need sons for? You've got me, you know? What a knucklehead. Anyway, so she was wanting children and she can't have them. And so she goes and she prays, and Eli thinks she's drunk. And then in verse 17 of chapter 1 of 1 Samuel, Eli said to her, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your request that you have asked of him." And he blesses her in this way, and God answers her prayer, and she gives birth to Samuel. It's a great, great story. Now, what I want to do is I want to look at what she prays in chapter 2 as a means of kind of application for all that muck that I just walked through. Because I want you to see that there is some real hope here. Because what I find interesting is the song she sings or the prayer that she prays. And I'm going to read these words, and then I want you to think about something. "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies. Because I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there is none one besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. Do not go on boasting so very proudly. Do not let arrogance come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and with him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken to pieces, but those who have stumbled strap on strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for bread. Those who were hungry cease to be hungry. Even the infertile woman gives birth to 7, but she who has many children languishes. The Lord puts to death and makes alive. He brings down the Sheol and brings up. The Lord makes poor rich. He humbles, he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the garbage heap to set them with nobles, and he gives them a seat of honor as an inheritance." Now, why that jumps off the page to me is that imagine for a moment, put yourself as best you can in Hannah's shoes. She wants children. She can't have children. She goes years praying for children, and finally God answers her prayer. And her response is not, "Thank you, God, that you gave me children. Thank you for blessing me for this child. Thank you for helping me to raise this child in the fear and admonition of the Lord. Help me to encourage," right, the kinds of things that you would think would be on the top of her mind. Instead, what she's really doing is talking about the injustice of the world in its totality, which I find really interesting. Because it isn't about having a baby that is the point of the thing. In fact, she never mentions it except in one line in verse 5, but rather she's praying for what the child represents both for her and for all women and ultimately for all humanity. She's highlighting that God is overturning the injustice of the established fallen world order and replacing it with justice. That's the gist of the story here that she's praying. She's not thanking God for a baby. She's thanking God that he's going to overthrow injustice in the world. God is turning the world of injustice on its head, and that's the theme of the prayer. What did a child mean to Hannah? It meant she had a future in this life and for generations to follow, no doubt. The child represented hope. Children provided her with economic security and social status. And in a male-dominated patriarchal society, women's primary purpose was less than men, less than God's original plan in Genesis. In order for there to be justice for her, in that culture, in that society, she had to become a mother. But that's not how it should be. The injustice here is that her value as a person was not in her equal image-bearing nature, but in her ability to benefit society in ways that male domination deemed suitable. Let me say that again. The injustice here is that her value as a person was not in the fact that she was an equal image-bearer, but only in her ability to benefit society in the ways that the men decided were going to be beneficial for society, and that was bear children. Women are designed to bear children by God. This is true. But an inability or a lack of opportunity to do so does not make her any less valuable than a man who cannot sire children. And we don't think of men in those terms. A single man without children, is not pitied like a woman is. And yet that society was so unjust, and that the only way she could thrive in it was to bear children, and preferably males. Being able to bear children is both a blessing and a necessity for the being fruitful and multiply nature of what God calls us to. But her value is not in her ability to do it or otherwise. She co-reigns with men whether she produces children or not. What she is highlighting is the injustice of the whole system, of which children bearing is just a part. Not just the effect of the fall on women, but on society in general. And she reminds us, men and women alike, of the day that is coming when God will turn the whole thing on its head. The West is facing many crises, not the least of which is violence against women. And the church can and should be playing an important role in demonstrating what healthy and safe relationships look like. Treating women like children, refusing to address abuse in healthy ways, and building cultures which subjugate women to the margins as bit players in church means the church too often disqualifies itself from speaking truth to the moment. Our women and our mothers matter. Not because they are mothers, and not even because they are women, but because they co-share the image of God with men. This alone is sufficient. Hannah finishes her prayer this way: those who contend with the Lord will be terrified. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king and will exalt the horn of his anointed. She is speaking of a prayer prophetically of a king who will come, and that king is Jesus. And one of the ways that that prayer of Hannah is answered is in the way that Jesus treated women. He elevated them above the place that the fallen culture had put them and restored them to the rightful place of co-reigners with him. To the women who call this church home, to those within the sound of my voice, I want to encourage you to continue and to seek to be women of valor, and to recognize the strength and the dignity and the worth that you have because you co-reign on earth with the men who have often sought to subjugate you. And whether God has called you to motherhood or not, this is not your value. Your value is found in the fact that you are blood-bought daughters of the Lord Jesus Christ, and you matter. So stand strong in the Lord and trust him who is to come. May the Lord bless you as you seek to be a blessing where he has placed you. Amen.